During a momentous speech delivered at a major awards ceremony, a seasoned actress took the stage to offer more than just a typical expression of gratitude. Rather than listing off names or merely basking in applause, she used the platform to reflect on a moment that had deeply troubled her, a public instance of mockery that shook her to the core. What struck her most was not simply the act itself, but what it represented: the normalization of cruelty. She saw it not as an isolated event, but as a symbolic warning of the direction society could take if empathy were to be diminished in public discourse. She described watching someone in a position of power perform a startling impersonation of a journalist with a physical disability. The act was not only unnecessary and mean-spirited, but also wielded with such casual disregard that it revealed something chilling: a comfort with dismissiveness, a comfort with hurting others without consequence. And what concerned her even more was that this was done on a highly visible stage. This wasn't tucked away in a dark corner. It was out in the open, presented almost as entertainment. The actress did not name names in her speech, which made her critique more universal. This omission left space for the audience to reflect on the behavior itself, rather than getting caught in the tug-of-war of partisan loyalty. She wasn't addressing a single person. She was addressing a pattern, a symptom of something larger that, if left unchecked, could spread. For her, it wasn't just about one person mocking another. It was about how quickly that mockery could be normalized when modeled by those in the spotlight. It was a warning wrapped in elegance and sorrow. What deeply disturbed her was not only the attack on one individual, but the indirect assault on a whole community of people, those living with disabilities, those who have been othered, those who are vulnerable. When someone mimics or mocks a person because of how they move, how they speak, or how they appear, it sends a signal to the broader public that such people are fair game for ridicule, and if that behavior comes from someone admired or followed, it sets a precedent. Disrespect, as she put it, invites more disrespect. She also emphasized the emotional impact this kind of public behavior has, not just on the individual who was mocked, but on anyone watching who has ever felt powerless. Children who are different, adults who struggle to be heard, families who have experienced discrimination, these people see such acts and absorb the message. They internalize the idea that decency might not protect them, that cruelty might be the new currency of influence. Her voice trembled slightly as she recalled the moment, not out of fear, but out of genuine heartbreak. She stood on that stage, not as a political figure, not as someone trying to stir division, but as a woman of conscience who had spent decades observing the human condition through the lens of art. And through that lens, she saw something very clear. Art depends on empathy. Acting, storytelling, music, all forms of expression depend on an ability to understand and feel what others feel. When empathy is stripped away, not only does society suffer, but art itself withers. She connected this realization to her life's work, noting that to be an actor is to slip into someone else's skin, to imagine their pain, their joy, their dreams and fears. That's what artists do. They build bridges between experiences. But when cruelty is celebrated, those bridges start to crumble. Without empathy, art becomes hollow, communication becomes manipulation, and leadership becomes intimidation. Her words, though calm and composed, carried an urgent weight. They weren't meant to provoke for the sake of drama, but to awaken a collective awareness. The audience grew quiet, not in discomfort, but in deep reflection. She had managed to shine a light on an issue many had seen but not fully processed. She made it personal without being self-centered, universal without being vague. This wasn't about left or right, celebrity or politician. It was about what we choose to uplift in society. Do we reward decency, or do we laugh along with the spectacle of cruelty? Her message made it clear. What we tolerate from those in power shapes the moral compass of the culture at large. And if we lose sight of empathy, we risk losing something. Far greater than a moment of decorum, we risk losing the very thread that holds a community together. During her impassioned speech, the acclaimed actress shifted focus toward a subject that lies at the very heart of any free and just society: the role of the press. With quiet intensity, she expressed a deeply rooted concern for the truth and those who dedicate their lives to uncovering it. Her voice, rich with both gravity and grace, framed journalism not as a profession to be taken lightly or dismissed, but as a vital pillar of democracy. She spoke from the perspective of someone who had seen what happens when the truth is manipulated or silenced, and she called on the audience to remember just how precious and how fragile a free press really is. She began by reminding the room that freedom of expression is a right earned and defended over generations, not something to be tossed aside when inconvenient. She stressed how journalists, often unseen and underappreciated, put themselves at risk to hold power accountable, to give voice to the voiceless, and to shed light on stories that would otherwise remain buried. These individuals, she said, are not the enemy of the people. They are the eyes and ears of a society striving to stay honest. In her view, the erosion of trust in the press does not happen overnight. It begins subtly, with the chipping away of credibility through slander and dismissal. When the legitimacy of journalism is questioned without cause, or when reporters are painted as villains, something far more dangerous takes root. The idea that truth itself is negotiable. She challenged this notion, not with anger, but with a quiet urgency that filled the room. Truth, she insisted, is not a matter of preference or perspective. It is the foundation upon which informed decisions are made. She went on to highlight how journalists often face harsh conditions to tell stories that matter. From war zones to the halls of justice, they pursue facts with determination, not for fame or reward, but out of a sense of duty. They are there when natural disasters strike, when governments fall, when corruption is exposed. They listen to survivors, sift through data, confront danger, and endure threats, all in service of delivering accurate, meaningful information to the public. She acknowledged that, like any profession, journalism is not immune to flaws. Mistakes are made, biases can emerge, and agendas may at times be present. But to dismiss the entire field because of imperfections is both unfair and dangerous. The answer to misinformation is not. With a quiet but resolute tone, the actress turned her attention to the subject of diversity in the arts, particularly within the film and television industry. She spoke not in broad generalities, but in vivid acknowledgement of the unique stories, voices, and backgrounds that have shaped the cultural fabric of storytelling. As she looked out over the audience, composed of actors, directors, writers, and other creatives, she reminded them that their community thrived not in spite of their differences, but because of them. She described how so many of the performers and creators celebrated that evening came from places far beyond the glittering borders of Los Angeles or New York. Some were born in small towns across the country, others in distant nations across oceans, bringing with them different dialects, traditions, and perspectives. She spoke of individuals who came from immigrant families, of artists raised in neighborhoods where dreams often fought to survive under the weight of poverty or prejudice. These stories, she insisted, were not just the backdrop to the industry. They were its beating heart. The strength of the arts, she explained, lies in its ability to foster understanding across boundaries. When audiences watch a film or a show, they are not merely entertained. They are invited into the experience of another life. They step into someone else's shoes, if only for an hour or two. And that kind of emotional proximity, walking alongside someone different, seeing the world through unfamiliar eyes, can open minds and break down walls in ways that lectures and debates cannot. She illustrated her point by referencing how actors are trained to become other people. Their craft demands that they empathize with characters who may have grown up in different cultures, spoken different languages, or held different beliefs. A performer must be able to understand someone else deeply enough to portray their life with authenticity. And for that to happen, the industry itself must welcome all kinds of people. The truth is, she noted, that if storytellers are not allowed to reflect the vastness of the human experience, the stories themselves will grow narrow, dull, and incomplete. She pointed out that the phrase Hollywood has often become shorthand for glamour or elitism, but its real power lies in its reach, how far its stories travel, and how deeply they affect the people who see them. And because these stories reach millions, perhaps billions around the world, they carry a responsibility. They can teach empathy, or erase it, They can shine a light on those too often ignored, or they can continue the cycle of invisibility. This is why inclusivity in casting, writing, and directing is not a matter of political correctness. It is essential to the integrity of the art form. She cautioned against the idea of limiting art to narrow definitions or tastes. Some voices argue for a return to a simpler or more traditional form of entertainment, forms that often exclude the rich spectrum of human identity. But to her, this was a dangerous path. To embrace only one version of the human story is to silence so many others. Art should not be sanitized to fit a single perspective. It should be bold enough to explore the unfamiliar, brave enough to tell stories that haven't been told yet. In one memorable moment, she compared the arts to a grand mosaic. Each piece, each accent, origin, and personal history adds depth and color to the final picture. Remove too many of those pieces, and the image becomes distorted. What remains might still resemble something familiar, but it loses its texture and truth. The audience, she feared, would be left with something less enriching, less challenging, and ultimately less honest. She then turned briefly to the idea of what is considered real art. There are those who dismiss film and television as mere entertainment, comparing them unfavorably to more traditional pastimes or physical competitions. But she argued that while these forms may have their place, they do not serve the same purpose as the arts. The arts are meant to stir something deeper, to reflect back to us not just the world as it is, but the world as it could be. They challenge assumptions, highlight injustice, and imagine possibilities. This is what diversity in the arts accomplishes. It expands the scope of what can be seen, felt, and understood. It invites everyone to the table, not just to observe, but to participate. And in doing so, it makes the entire cultural landscape stronger, richer, and more resilient. It offers not just representation, but belonging. As the actress neared the conclusion of her speech, the emotional tone deepened, taking on a more intimate and vulnerable quality. The room had already fallen silent, wrapped in the weight of her words, but it was this final reflection that struck, a chord beyond politics or performance. She spoke not as an icon or a public figure, but as a human being who, like so many others, had faced grief, uncertainty, and despair, and had found solace through the act of creation. It was a personal offering, a reminder that the arts are not just expressions of joy or beauty, but also sanctuaries for broken hearts. Drawing on the wisdom of a dear friend who had passed away, she quoted a simple but profound piece of advice. Take your broken heart and make it into art. It was a line filled with quiet power, and as she said it, the emotion in her voice was unmistakable. This was not a hollow slogan or a poetic flourish. It was a truth earned through experience. In those few words, she captured what countless artists, performers, and storytellers have always known, that sorrow is not the end, but a beginning. Grief, she suggested, is one of the most universal of human experiences. Whether it stems from loss, injustice, disillusionment, or fear, it touches everyone at some point. And yet, in that pain lies the potential for profound transformation. Through art, whether it be film, music, painting, writing, or performance, we find a way to process what is often too overwhelming to confront directly. Creativity becomes not just a coping mechanism, but a form of resistance, resilience, and renewal. She emphasized that this transformation is not always grand or public. Sometimes it is quiet and unseen, a song written in a notebook that no one hears, a sketch made in the dark, a poem left unfinished on a nightstand. But these acts matter. They are evidence of a soul refusing to give in to bitterness or numbness. They represent the choice to feel, to speak, to continue. Her words reached beyond the world of professional artists and into the hearts of anyone who had ever created something in the face of pain. A child drawing after a loss, a teacher writing, a journal entry in the late hours, a mother humming a melody she used to sing to someone now gone. These small, private acts are sacred. They are declarations of life amid sorrow. She also touched on the healing nature of storytelling itself, not just for the creator but for the audience. When people see their own fears, dreams, or heartbreaks reflected back at them through a character or a song, it reminds them they are not alone. Art becomes a mirror, a bridge, a light in a darkened room. It gives language to things that are otherwise too heavy to carry. And in sharing these reflections, artists offer companionship to strangers who may never meet them, but will feel seen and understood. What made her message so powerful was its simplicity. There was no call for applause, no demand for recognition. Just a gentle urging that even in moments of despair, something beautiful can emerge. The world may be fractured, chaotic, or cruel, but in response to that, we can still choose to build rather than destroy. We can choose to create something meaningful, something that holds space for others to breathe, to cry, to laugh, or to hope. She made it clear that this was not about escaping reality, but confronting it in a way that affirms humanity. Art, at its best, is a kind of rebellion against indifference. It declares that feeling deeply is not a weakness, but a source of strength. It takes what could isolate us, grief, heartbreak, disappointment, and turns it into a thread that connects us instead. Even as her voice softened and her gaze lowered, her words left a lasting impression. There was no need for a grand finale, no flourish of rhetoric. The message had been received. For anyone who had ever wondered what to do with the weight they carry, she had given an answer. Turn it into something true. Turn it into something that might help someone else carry theirs. And in that, the act of creation becomes both personal salvation and a gift to the world. As her speech drew to a close, the room remained hushed, caught in that delicate pause where emotion lingers, not yet ready to release. What she had offered was more than a commentary on the times or a critique of public behavior. It was a meditation on responsibility, empathy, and the fragile yet enduring power of the human spirit. The final moments of her address served as both a benediction and a challenge. She did not stand at the podium demanding applause or approval. She stood there holding a mirror. The ending of her speech was not marked by thunderous declarations, but by the quiet insistence that each of us plays a part in shaping the culture we live in. Whether we are artists, audience members, citizens, or simply people trying to live with compassion, we are all responsible for the tone we set in our interactions, in our work, and in the way we respond to both cruelty and kindness. Her words made it clear, decency is not passive. It is a choice that must be made again and again, even when it is difficult, even when it is unpopular. There was something especially striking in how she reminded everyone that the arts do not exist in a vacuum. The stories we tell and the ones we listen to are reflections of our values. They help form the identity of a generation. She called on her peers to continue using their platforms not just to entertain, but to elevate, to give voice to the unheard, to protect the dignity of those who are too often left behind. Her voice, rich with both weariness and hope, wove together the personal and the collective, the artistic and the ethical. As she looked out across the audience, she wasn't just addressing actors or industry elites. She was speaking to anyone, watching, at home, in their living rooms, perhaps feeling a little more vulnerable or unseen. To them especially, she offered something lasting, a call to remain open, to stay sensitive, and to never underestimate the quiet, transformative power of compassion. That message was not about perfection or ideology, it was about humanity. Even as the lights began to dim and the ceremony moved on, her words did not fade. They stayed with people, replayed in conversations, shared across headlines, scribbled into notebooks and quoted on timelines. Not because they were controversial, but because they were true. And in times when truth can feel distorted or disposable, that kind of truth that comes from a place of genuine feeling is quietly revolutionary. She ended not with a roar, but with a whisper that echoed far beyond the stage. A reminder that the heart once broken can still create, that art once born of sorrow can still heal, and that even in the loudest, most chaotic moments, a voice grounded in empathy can still